Kentucky legislators are gearing up for a return to Frankfort to answer Governor Steve Beshear's call for a special legislative session to deal with legislative and judicial redistricting. Coming up on Kentucky Outlook, we'll talk with two area legislators to find out what's in store, as well as talk about some of the laws that are now on the books in the state of Kentucky following the regular session of the General Assembly completed last spring. And to round out the half hour on this Kentucky Outlook, we'll pay tribute to the late Helen Thomas, White House correspondent. Kentucky Outlook is next. The program is Kentucky Outlook. I'm your host, Barbara Deeb, and every day we bring you talking heads on a mission. Well, at least once a week here on Kentucky Outlook. Our mission today is to talk about the upcoming special session of the General Assembly in Kentucky. And joining us to share that information, we have Senator Mike Wilson, representing the 32nd District of Kentucky, which is a portion of Warren and Butler counties. Thank you so much for being here. And former House Speaker, our representative from Bowling Green, Jody Richards. Thanks for being here, as always. So were you surprised when you got the governor's call? And I make it sound like he actually calls you individually. It doesn't work that way. But when you heard the word that you'd be heading back to Frankfort, were you surprised?
No, it's something that we expected. You know, you have rumors that that's going to happen, and then you have rumors of several, but we figured that it would just be the one special session and hoped only that would be it for redistricting.
And when we left without making the maps, we knew that we would be back, and so he was trying to find a time when there would be fewer conflicts. So, and I think one thing that's really important, he gave us enough time so that we can be ready and just have a 5-day session, and I think that's very important. I'm always opposed to any session that you don't have all the kinks worked out before you go.
Well, help our viewers understand how a special session works. In essence, the governor has to call it, he can call it, and he can set the agenda. So he can also set the duration of that agenda? No.
No, he makes the call, sets the agenda, but the legislature ends it. They determine the end date. So, and usually we like to get out earlier than the governor does, so often they continue to put other things on the call, although I do not think he will this time.
And really one of the things that's happened for us, you can do a special session in 5 days, and the way you do that is that any revenue bill or anything like that usually has to start in the House, and the redistricting bill will be the same. It'll have to start there. They'll do it, they'll pass it, has to have 3 readings. They'll pass it Wednesday, give it to us in the Senate. We'll have its first reading, and then by Friday we can pass it. So we should have our maps together, be able to do it in 5 days. But we've also, the LRC has canceled all of our committee meetings for the month. So basically it'll be just a wash. There would be hopefully no additional charge.
So you could really focus, and the LRC
Right.
being the Legislative Research Commission.
It shouldn't cost the citizens of Kentucky any additional money, because all the committee meetings have been canceled, and there will be some committee meetings running concurrently, but there won't be any additional cost to the citizens.
I see. So this is a cost saving. So in essence, they were going to have to pay legislators anyway to be there for these
That's
committee
right.
meetings. So they've canceled those, and they'll be made up at another time during regular
there
session?
will be some meetings running concurrently, and then the ones that are really have to be done, and then the others can wait till September.
Dollars and cents. It costs money to call a special session, and that's why a lot of Kentuckians don't like it, because they say, why can't you get your business done during the regular session? What are we talking about cost-wise?
Well, about $60,000 a day, but we meet fewer days than most states do anyway, so we do have to make sure that we're as efficient as we can possibly be in the days that we're there.
Agreed?
Agreed. Yeah, it's about $300,000, but with not meeting on those other days for committee meetings and just concentrating on those 5 days, it's pretty much going to be a wash and not cost any additional money.
Well, we're going to take a short break here in a minute, but to kick things off, what the special session is about. It's about redistricting, but we're not talking about congressional redistricting.
No. We did the congressional districting and 2012, and the judicial districts, which we have to do also, the 7 judicial districts, Supreme Court districts, and Court of Appeals. So all that's left is the legislative House and Senate districts, and we will do that. We did it once, and the court said it was unconstitutional. And let me say real quickly, it is difficult because the federal government has to be up or down 5%. So there's a one person, one vote, and the state says, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, that you cannot split a county that's smaller than the size of a district. Like there are 4.3 million people in Kentucky, so each House district's about 43,000, and each Senate district's about 114,000.
Well, I want to talk some more about that and help our viewers get a sense of what we're talking about. We're going to take a short break here on Kentucky Outlook, and we'll be back to talk more with Jody Richards and Mike Wilson. Don't go away. Kentucky Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb. We're talking about the fact that our legislators from the state of Kentucky will be heading back to Frankfort on August 19th to attend a special session at the call of Governor Steve Beshear. And what they're going to be talking about is redistricting. And what we're talking about is legislative redistricting, judicial redistricting. And what does that mean to you? Well, let's find out as we welcome back to the program Senator Mike Wilson and Representative Jody Richards. Before the break, you were talking about the way they do things at the federal level, the way they do things at the state level. But someone just tuning in, why is this important?
Well, the state, you cannot split a county that is less than 43,000. And there are only 22 counties that are larger than that. So that means you have to line up a couple of small counties, smaller counties like Simpson and Allen, and take a chunk of Warren. Logan and Todd, and take a chunk of Warren.
To come up with that
to come up with that 43,000, because you cannot split a county and smaller than 43,000. And then on the other hand, the federal government says that you cannot be in variation more than 5% up or 5% down. So the ideal number is 43,000, the top number is 45,000 plus, and the lower number is 41,000 plus. But to do 120 counties that way is pretty difficult in the House.
I envision puzzle, right? And we're putting those puzzle pieces together.
Well,
you mentioned the importance of consistency.
Right. It's a little different in the Senate because it's close around 113,000, I think, for a Senate district, in which Warren County would be a perfect senatorial district, which is likely what's going to happen with me. But the one thing about it, people ask me, say, you got a map from the House, why didn't you guys complete
During
that?
the regular session.
Right. And another thing that's important, it's one person, one vote, and you even have to include, the federal prisoner numbers or either exclude them. And so we had included that in the congressional maps. And then the map we got from the House, they did not include them, and there was some dispute over what numbers we could use. And finally, that's been settled, that we have to be consistent with what we've already done, and so we will actually include those numbers in the maps that we're doing for the special session.
It is kind of interesting because no one knew for sure whether we should count them or not, because the federal prisoners, because we don't know when they're coming in, we don't know when they're leaving, none of them are from Kentucky. So should you really count them? And some people say, I think most people say, probably if you could go back and not count them at all, that would be a better choice. But Senator Wilson is right. I think you need to be consistent.
So that was in 2012 when those decisions were made to include federal
Right,
prisoners.
that's right.
And so now we're saying if we're looking at judicial and legislative districts, let's include those same numbers.
Right, to be
So what you're
consistent,
saying-
otherwise you might have to go back and redo the congressional maps, and I don't think anybody really wants to do that.
Well, that would have been very minor, really.
Well,
It
it
would have
probably
been very
would have,
minor
but-
because there are only a few federal prisoners. Most of them are in way up in eastern Kentucky in Elliott County, and there are not many, some in Clay County.
Well, you bring up a nice segue to my next point, is because someone watching this might go, well, why does this affect me? But it does affect you, and especially as politicians, as individuals who have to run a race in a given district, it does affect. You know, it affects your numbers, it affects who you're asking to vote for you, it affects what you're representing when you go to Kentucky. So.
Yeah, it affects people that want to run this coming up next term, which
in what
will
way?
be.
Help us understand.
Because if you don't know what district you're going to be in, the line might be drawn for you that you're in a different district than you are right now, so that you have to wait until the redistricting is done to know whether or not you're going to be able to run in that district. And so you have to wait. And of course, the filing deadline, I think, is January 30th, if I'm not mistaken. Somewhere. And I'll give them some time, yeah, to be able to make that decision to run or not. So.
Well, who your constituency is going to be.
Yeah, and under the statute, a person has to live in that district for 1 year. So that's why it needs to be to the general election of next year, and that's why it needs to be done now, so that people will have enough time to file and move in the right district that they want to move.
Well, now you can see why this can be a real, you know, people can play hardball with this thing called redistricting, because it affects a lot of people. President Obama today was speaking about other issues. I think it was immigration, but he was saying, can we just get rid of all these distractions and get down to the business of politics? You know, we can apply that certainly
that
to.
That is politics, isn't it?
It is. We can apply that. What about the politicking that you saw coming out of this last session? Yeah, because we had some personality changes, if you will, at some top level positions. Did you see a change?
Having been there a long time, I thought this was one of the best sessions we've had in a long time. And a part of it was the new leadership in the Senate. My mom used to have a statement about a new broom sweeps clean, and President Stivers was trying his best to run a good ship, and I think he did. And our leadership and his leadership got together very well, and it was a good session, and the kind of session that the people of Kentucky expect us to have each time.
So there you go. The bar's been set.
Well, absolutely. I think that President Stivers, I agree with that totally, 100%. He had more of a team-based leadership approach to the Senate and really encouraged us to sit down and talk to our counterparts, and that's what Carl Rollins was the representative in charge of the Education Committee, and he and I met several times. I met with the governor several times and talking about the graduation bill and things like that. And we came to some compromises pretty early on. We're able to back away and then turn those over to leadership, let them work out the final details. And you know, we had a lot. I've heard people say there was more done this last session than any session in the last 20 years. So it's very productive. That's a big statement.
That's a big statement. Like, now the bar's really been set high.
Right, it has.
We
I
talked
don't necessarily agree with that. I think there were some
Oh,
others
yeah.
that were.
Someone who's been there for a while?
But,
Been there for a while.
But see, I've been there 20 years, and I do remember. But anyway, it certainly was good.
Well, June 25th was a red letter day, if you will, because a lot of the laws and a lot of the action that you took in this last session in the spring actually became law. Let's talk about a few of those. Does one stand out to you that's going to be law?
Well, I like the raising the age from 16 to 18, the graduation bill. I actually sponsored a bill kind of like that several years ago, and I think the way it worked out was really good, and that 55 districts had to agree to it before it became effective, and those 55%, and those did become decide they wanted to do it, and I think some others will do it too, and it is, in my opinion, the right time for this, because if you didn't, nearly all districts have, maybe all districts have, access to alternative programs. If you don't have an alternative program, then a classroom can be disrupted, but the alternative programs are very effective. We have Lighthouse Academy here that is tremendously effective in the Bowling Green system, or the Warren County system, and so it's, I think the timing is right for it, and I believe over time it will prove to really be good.
Now, what we're talking about is the school districts then themselves can decide if they want to change the compulsory graduation age from 16 to 18.
Well, they could, but now after 55% have done it, then all of them
have
in a
to.
couple of years have to do
In 4
have to
years,
do
and
that.
there's the
Yeah.
key, that 4-year
Yeah.
window. So this, we're talking about, so we'll see some of this starting in 2015, maybe 2016.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it gives the opportunity. It was local for us, I think, on our side. We were wanting to make sure the districts had the option, local option, to raise that themselves, and I think that was a great compromise, getting it to the 55% or 97. I think it was the race to 96 or 97 to get it to that 55%, and then you give the rest of them 4 years. It gives them some time to be able to, those that don't have those resources, alternative schools that Speaker mentioned, to get those in place and so that they have that, because it is going to cost a little bit more money to take care of those things. We have great alternative schools here, but some districts don't.
Yeah, it's not all the
The
same.
thing that surprised me was how, and there were some financial incentives given by the State Department and the governor to do that, but it did surprise me with how many moved as quickly as they did.
And yeah, those incentives will make a difference. I want to talk more about that in human trafficking in the state of Kentucky. Really? Well, we're going to talk more about that when we return with more Kentucky Outlook right here on WKU PBS. Senator Mike Wilson and Representative Jody Richards. When we come back, stay with us. Kentucky Outlook continues. I'm Barbara Deeb, and don't forget about our Facebook and Twitter, and you can find us on our webpage, but you can always go there to find out more about what we're doing here at WKU Public Television. Right now, what these two gentlemen are doing is getting ready to head to Frankfort for a special session on August 19th. Senator Mike Wilson rejoins us and Representative Jody Richards. Before the break, we were talking about the redistricting and how important that is, and that's what you'll be doing in the special session, but we're also talking about some of the laws that have become law, if you will, since that last session. And in particular, you wanted Jody to talk about the special taxing districts. Help us know about that.
House Bill 1, and that showed how important we thought that bill was, dealt with taxing districts such as fire district, conservation districts, library districts, all these. Those in our community they're all very accountable. We got a list of the ones that were accountable and the ones that weren't. But it's most of these districts, or many of the districts, some of those that I mentioned here do not, but some districts have the right to raise taxes without any recall. And we just wanted to make sure that they had, that they were transparent, that we knew where they were, what they were doing, how they were spending the money. And there are hundreds of these across the state, and some of them weren't really accountable. They were raising taxes without the people knowing it. So this does bring accountability. It shows where all of them are and gives the state much more of a handle on these taxing districts.
And the people of Kentucky.
Yes.
Where their tax dollars are going.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that's one of the things that if you're raising taxes and you're using tax money, it has to be transparent and you have to be accountable for it. And I think that was one of the key things that this bill did, was make it much more transparent and much more accountability in regards to that. So he and I definitely agree in regards to the bill.
Now, agreement, you got it right here. But bipartisanship right here on the set. But we were talking before the break about one of the bills that passed had to do with human trafficking. Now, watching this, you might go, really, in Kentucky we have human trafficking? An issue. I mean, so much so that we had to pass a law?
Well, I think the bill, one of the things that it did was, you have these children that are, actually kidnapped and put into this kind of thing, and they provided some protection for them, that they're a victim rather than they're somebody that's breaking the law or anything like that. And we're looking at trying to make this much more of a case that we can cut this off here in Kentucky, that it's not taking place.
We had a bill, but it wasn't strong enough, and we raised the penalties and made it easier for law enforcement officers to enforce the laws. And it is surprising, and it's frightening, and it's really harmful to people. And a lot of these folks are brought in from other places, and it's just, I think the law is strong, and I'm really proud of it.
Well, Are you also proud of the fact that we are finally looking at hemp in a different way in the state of Kentucky? That was quite a controversial issue in the regular session, and I think a lot of people automatically assume it's marijuana, but it's a cousin, or it's in the same family, but a whole different entity.
Right, it doesn't have anywhere near like THC levels. It's almost negligible compared to what like a marijuana plant that they would utilize in smoking it. This is much different plant. They raise it for the stalk, whereas the marijuana plant they raise for the leaves and the bud and that kind of thing. So it is very, very different. I think there was law enforcement was not too excited about it, but this Kentucky used to be one of the largest producers, I think, of hemp.
Its history is rich.
It is
hemp
really
production.
with hemp, and
Yes.
so now what we are set up for with the law here in Kentucky is that we are prepped to be able to do. If we can get law passed on the federal level, which our federal delegation is working on, then we would be like first in line to be able to do some of that, producing hemp products in Kentucky.
You mentioned Rand Paul, Senator Rand Paul at the federal level, very strong supporter of this.
But there is a problem in that it is illegal, and no one has been able to get that changed so far. The caveat that I had was I was hoping that it wouldn't raise people's expectations too high, because it is not, it's against federal law. I think the final bill was much improved because it does sort of tie it to energy and energy development, alternative energy kinds of things. So and sets up a program at UK where they structure it and look at it and see if there's some way that whenever, if ever, the federal government says it's legal, then we can move into it. But with corn prices high and bean prices high, I can't see people just flocking into it unless there was a market and unless there was some sort of a specialized market for it.
Well, which is what this law does, that
Yeah,
in the
right.
event that
That's
those markets
right.
become available, Kentucky would be ready?
Yeah, it sets up more like a pilot program for it, and it's something that it's not going to be wide open. Should the federal government, we get an exemption or something like that from them, it's going to be more of a pilot type program and gradually gone into type of thing.
So Kentucky could be one of the leaders again
Yes.
in the hemp production field. What about export-import and those kinds of things? Auburn Leather, just down the road, is one of the greatest exporters, was recognized recently for their leather shoelaces. People don't realize the role Kentucky plays in that larger global market, do they?
We're above our, we do better than our population would make you think in terms of exports, certainly automobiles and leather products, not a lot of niche kinds of things, and certainly bourbon. So we do have some products that are popular overseas.
So you're getting ready to head to Frankfort for the special session August 19th, but coming up right after that, we've got an election coming up. And Senator McConnell now has what I think the Democrats would call a very worthy opponent. Let's talk about that, if you will. Help us understand. Allison Lundergan-Grimes.
Well, I know Allison well. She ran very well when she ran for Secretary of State. But before she runs, there is apparently a Republican primary. And so we will see how that comes out. And of course, Senator McConnell would have to be very much a favorite there. But Senator McConnell's races are always interesting. They always bring up a lot of interesting topics, so it will be fun to witness.
You mentioned a Republican runoff. Bevin has mentioned that he's going to enter the race. Do you know anything about him?
I just know that he's a businessman. He announced today, I think is today and tomorrow, that he's entering the race to run for the Republican nomination against Senator McConnell, and I tell you, I just from my perspective, I wouldn't want to be in his shoes. He's definitely going to be somebody that'd be very hard to beat. And when you look at his position, Senator McConnell is in, and he's in leadership, which should they flip the Senate, then they will be in a position to decide what goes to the floor and what doesn't. Whereas if you elect somebody that is a freshman, they're not going to be in a leadership position. So I think there's a lot of people looking at that very seriously on the Republican side, and I think you'll find that, in my opinion, that Mitch McConnell will probably come out on top in that.
Spoken like a good Republican, right? And do you agree, or how do you feel?
Yes, I mean, you'd have to say that Senator McConnell will come out on top in the primary. And as Charlie Cook from the Cook Report, political report, said last night, Senator McConnell always, you can expect someone to run against him to get 47%, and then, but whether that person can get to 51 is another question. And so, but I do think it will be an interesting race because Allison is a young lady, very articulate, and she will.
It'll make for some good TV,
yeah,
for sure. Senator Mike Wilson, thank you. Representative Jody Richards,
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have you on Kentucky Outlook. We appreciate it. Now, before we wrap up the program today, though, we wanted to share a Kentucky Outlook rewind with you. You know, in the nearly 25 years that we've been producing this program, we've had thousands of people who've been on this set and in this studio, some famous, some infamous, some great, some average. But one of the more memorable conversations that I had was with the legendary White House correspondent, Helen Thomas. She was no doubt one of the most recognized reporters in America, and for us women who work in the field of journalism, she was a trailblazer. We leave you now with this snippet of our December 12th, 2003, don't laugh at the hair, interview with the late Helen Thomas. Enjoy. We'll see you next week on Kentucky Outlook. When did Helen Thomas decide that this was the career route she was going to take? Was
High
it
school,
intentional?
saw my byline in the high school paper when I was a sophomore, and I said, this is it. My ego swelled, and I loved the collegiality of working on the school paper, and I decided that this is it, where I can always be nosy.